Okay, Carlo, can we start? Did you have your 1 minute?
Yeah, sure. Of course. Feel free.
Okay, good. All right, so great news, guys. I just got a call. Seriously, I don't know how it happened, but God works in mysterious ways. I just got a call from a couple of students of mine from last boot camp. They took the exam this morning and both of them passed. One of them with 102 questions, one of them with 105 questions. So it's all doable. What I'm saying is that, it works. And I just spoke to him on the phone. Is Ron with us? No, Ron is not with us, but he knows this guy because he was training with us on the CISSP training program as well. But what he said that he happened amazingly, in this perfect timing. He said everything you covered in the first part of the first day of the boot camp, which is basically what we covered. He said everything came to life during the exam. I had the whiteboard and I had the five main, priorities in front of me. And I remember that scenario-based questions are a waste of time and all this, and eyes on the prize and everything that we talked to. And this guy passed 102 questions in the exam. He passed, and the girl that took the exam with him passed on 105 questions. And I'm super excited about this. And I'm super excited sharing this with you because it means that the system actually works. And I want you to remember this. As you train to your exam, the end of the day, that will be your moment. That will be your moment. When you conquer that CISSP exam, and you give me a call and you send me the text message saying, I passed the exam, this is the world. This means the world to me. And knowing that you succeed and knowing that you elevate your career and your credentials, your personal credentials. So exciting news, I think, for everyone. All right, here we go. Are you ready to start? You all on mute.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, great. Okay, so the way this bootcamp, the way the material is built, the way the presentations are built, is that they're built with all 8 domains, but the book that you have with you includes 21 chapters. So for every domain, we start with domain 1 today. The next page will be chapter 1. So you know to go back to your book, to the ISC book, and look for all this information that we're going to cover here. Look for it in your book under chapter number 1. Okay? Does that make sense? All right. There's going to be a lot of material that I added here. For example, the OS Top 10, I think it's chapter 21. I added here, and you will not find it in the book. And the reason I added it because I believe that if you read through it, if you know that material, it will help you understand that specific chapter in the book. So it's to support you. It's more supplemental information in order to support your knowledge and knowledge building for the CISSP. So without further ado, let's begin with our chapter 1. The chapter number 1 is security governance through principles of policies. Principles and policies. So when we say governance, when we say security governance, what's the first thing that comes to light when we talk about that word, governing? How do we do that? How do we do governance? Anyone can take the hit here. Shachar, let's try you for Valentino. Are you trying to answer the question?
How do we do governance? By control, by creating regulations and
by control and creating regulations. Okay. The first I have a problem with governing through control because it reminds dark regimes in the world of trying to control the people's brains. 1984, George Orwell and such. So we're not trying to control the people. Okay, we're not trying to control the behavior. We're not trying to control anything. We're simply trying to set the rules to say what is right to do and what is wrong to do. Okay, the same rule that we have when we have a red light, traffic light. Okay, we drive and we have red light, and we all know it's a global language to tell us to stop, right? Now, I cannot control the drivers and make them stop. I can only tell them what is the right thing to do. And the same thing in security governance. I cannot control my user behavior. Okay, this is really important for you as an executive, as a CISSP. You cannot control your user behavior because this is a tendency of most security professionals. They say, I will ban users from doing this. I will stop the users of doing that. I will isolate this machine so it will not be able to do this or that. When you're talking about technology, it's easy to control. It's easy to program technology in such a way that it will not do what you don't intend them to do and will do what you do intend them to do. But people do not act like that. Okay, organizations do not act like that. Sometimes you have to bend corners for the organization to advance, to move forward. Okay. However, when you do bend the corner, when you do take an exception of your policies, of the procedure, the right procedure, you want to make sure that this risk of going outside the boundaries of your governance will be documented and well thought. So the risk behind it is well considered. Okay. So again, going back to what is security governance? Security governance is basically the book of laws, the book of what is right and what is wrong to do. When we talk about security, people should obey the law. People should always act according to the laws and regulations of the organization and policies and procedures, but they don't always do that. Okay, so when they don't do that by intention or non-intentionally, we want to hold them accountable. We want to say, hey, this is wrong. You cannot do this. You cannot send yourself this sensitive Excel database with sensitive information via Gmail. You cannot do that. You can do that technically, but it's not the right thing to do. Okay, so this is security governance. And again, the right security governance will be to work with the people. Okay, communication and collaboration again. When we talk about security governance, the one way to do that, to achieve that, is to connect the objects and subjects. And probably some of you remember when we did the previous sessions, we talked about the differences between an object and a subject. So the object is anything that is passive. Okay, it can be a piece of information, it can be a system, a computer, or something that we want to work on, operate on. Data, okay, an Excel spreadsheet, Word document is an object. It's something that includes information, or it represents an asset that we want to protect. Okay, now in order to connect it to the ongoing operation of our organization, we will need subjects to work on it. So the subject is an entity of the organization. Okay, it can be a user and it can be another system, a system that accesses database. Okay, for example, a web page that now can access a database. That web page becomes the subject because it accesses the database. The database is there, okay? And the web page now calls for records from the database. It acts on the object that is called database. The way we want to maintain security governance with the connection of these two, subject that operates on an object, we want to make sure that we maintain the CIA triad. CIA triad stands for confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And for us to maintain confidentiality, we want to make sure that the objects are disclosed or are visible or accessible for only authorized subjects. Okay, this is confidentiality. This is maintaining the C. And the I means that only authorized objects can modify, authorized subjects can modify the objects. Okay, do you see that? Do you see where this is going, right? And when we say availability, we want to make sure that the objects are available when the subjects require them to be available. So for example, if we have a system or a database that no one access or no one needs in the middle of the night over the weekend, we can probably then run some maintenance work on it because that time request for that system or that data is very low, and we can do other things with it. But on high requirement time or high rise of requirements, for example, 8 in the morning or 9 in the morning, Monday morning, a lot of users log in and they all want to access to their mailboxes. So we will make sure the availability of the Exchange system. Okay, the Microsoft Exchange system, for example, if we use Microsoft Exchange system for emails. Now, in order for us to maintain the right amount of C, I, and A, right, we always need to keep in mind that this triad is always equivalent in all three sides of it. We cannot have more C than I, because if we keep more confidentiality, something else has got to give, okay? So we will do less integrity and less availability. So we constantly, our goal as security professionals, as security executives, okay, is to make sure we keep those three balanced, okay? We want to have strong confidentiality measures, okay, but without crippling the organization, okay? We want to have strong integrity measures, but we don't want to cripple the availability with all the integrity checks and so on and so forth. And we want to maximize the availability, okay, but we don't want to maximize the availability in such a way that will compromise confidentiality. So see where this is going? The triad needs to be balanced here, okay? And as CISSP, you want to keep that in the back of your mind as you answer the questions. A question that will give, an answer to a question that will definitely give the C the vast majority of attention is probably not the right way to answer. Okay, so balance the C, I, and A in your questions, in your answers, right? Does that make sense, guys? Just nod with your heads, and that'll be enough. Thank you. Now let's look at the CIA from a different point of view. For every C, for every positive thing that we want to do, there can be a negative. The other side of it, or the mirror side of it, can be a negative one. Okay, so for confidentiality, in this CISSP questions, I might find the word disclosure. Okay, so I need to understand and I need to remember that when I'm being asked about disclosure of information, my controls now will come from confidentiality of information. Does that make sense? For disclosure, we will need confidentiality controls. And for integrity, okay, integrity controls will need to deal with alteration of information. So someone alters the database, or alters the record, or alters the packet in our network, okay? That thing to alter the information. So what we want to do is maintain integrity controls, okay? And then for the availability, we now have destruction. Destruction is the negative side of availability, okay? It's the mirror side, it's the other side of availability. So in order to avoid destruction of data, assets, information, business activity, we want to maintain availability controls, okay, reliability, timely access to data resources, all this, we want to make sure that the information and systems are available in order to avoid destruction of anything, data, business processes, business profits, and so on, okay? So if we put them one against the other, now we have both CIA on one side and the DAD on the other side, CIA versus DAD, okay? Confidentiality versus disclosure. So you can get questions about disclosure of information. In your mind, you will need to immediately address the confidentiality controls. Does that make sense? Okay? When they ask you about disclosure of information, boom, trigger the confidentiality control. When they ask you about destruction of process, boom, availability control. Okay? Data modification or database modification, alteration, okay? Boom, integrity controls. I want to make sure that the alteration was not something that was not meant to take place. Okay, the modification of the data was done by the right subjects on the right object, and I can audit that as well. All right, this is really, really important because this is basic of the CISSPs, the CISSP governance. CIA versus DAD and the balance that we keep in this triad. All right, we good? All right. The next one that helps us do security governance is the IAAA module. And the IAAA module speaks about, the I stands for, it's an acronym, okay? So the I stands for identification, first A, authentication, authorization, and the last one is auditing, okay? So that's the IAAA. And so let's talk a little bit about that, and we will see that, we will meet that again later on when we talk about domain 5 of the CISSP, which talks about identification and access management, okay? So the first part for identification, the first rule here for any identification, we always say that to identify yourself, you don't need to be someone, okay? You don't need that right person for you to identify yourself. Anybody can claim any identity, and this is something I want you to write on your presentation, okay? Anybody can claim any identity, all right? That means that I cannot control, or I can do very, very little on controlling the identification phase, okay? People come in and they say, hi, I'm Chen. How do we know that their name is Chen? How do we know that their name is Valentino? They simply say it, right?
Show your badge.
What's that, Carl?
Show your badge.
Show your badge. Perfect, perfect. This is perfect timing, Carl. Because what Carlo just did is he moved from identification, from me saying, hi, I'm Chen, he said, let me authenticate you. When I respond to an identification process, I respond with authentication, all right? That's where your controls kick in, okay? The controls of show me your badge, because you're supposed to have a badge. If you're Chen, you're supposed to have a badge. If you're Chen, you can now tell me the right password, right? I can challenge you in some way that will help me authenticate your identity, all right? Make sure that you is actually you, right? So for the authentication process, we have several controls that we can put in place. And for the CISSP, this one is super important because it will definitely meet you in your exam. No CISSP exam exists without this slide. So for you guys, I want you to mark this as WB, whiteboard, okay? Look at the supplementals that you got for me. Look at the booklets of the CISSP and the materials there. Look for this one, this part that talks about the types of authentication, and mark it as a whiteboard. That's your first whiteboard, all right? Why is it a whiteboard? It's a whiteboard because ISC keeps asking us questions that are, they target, they try to manipulate our brain. And for that matter, what I built here can help you remember the order of types of authentication that ISC and the world of security identifies. So for that matter, I want you to remember Jungle Book. In Jungle Book, we have the snake and his name is Ka, okay? So in Jungle Book, the name Ka is K and double A, but I changed it a little bit. And instead of calling the snake Ka with double A, I call it Ka. And that's exactly what I want you to remember. Excuse me. KHA stands for type 1, K, type 2, H, type 3, A. Those types are types of categories of authentication that ISC will ask you about them. They will ask you, what is type 2 of authentication? Type 2 is something you have. This is your H. And what is type 3? Type 3 is something you are, right? That's your biometric authentication. Something you know is type 1. That's why I want you to remember the KHA. They will sometimes give you the definition of that category, something you know, something you have, or something you are, and ask you to mark the right type, type 1, 2, 3, and maybe something else. Or they will ask you about the type. And I want you to, immediately answer that. Type 2, okay, that's the H, because I remember Ka, okay? Now, know that there are many other different authentication categories that they can use. They can use somewhere you are. Somewhere you are is, GPS location, is identification of your location. But it's not included, pay attention to this because this is really important. It's not included in the 3 types of authentication. So when ISC speaks about the 3 categories of authentication, they only speak about Ka. And when they speak about 2-factor authentication, they speak about at least 2 of these 3 combined. That means that you're required, in order to authenticate to a process, to a system, to an organization, you need to have 1, right, and some sort of authentication categories, can be type 1, type 2, or type 3, okay? And also another one of these 3, but not the same one. So for example, if I ask you for your password, and then I ask you for, what is the name of your elementary school, I basically choose from the same category, because both are something you know the first time, right? But if I ask you for your password, and then I ask you for your thumbprint, now it's something you know, it's something you are, right? Type 1 and type 3. These are 2-factor authentication, or 2FA. Now, we can also do more than 2, okay? We can have 3 or 5 different authentications in the process of authenticating an identity, okay? Anything more than 2 factors together, combined, is called MFA, multi-factor authentication, okay? Now, where are the pitfalls with ISC? What are the traps that they have for us, that they have set for us? Some of you probably already noticed them with our exam system. As you took the exams on our exam systems, you probably noticed that there were a few questions asking you, or in the answers, you had an answer about something you do. Okay, what is something you do? Is this related to any factor that we can see here for authentication? What do you think?
No, it's authorization, it's something else.
It's a what?
Authorization.
Authorization, something that you do. No, I'm not quite sure about this, Aaron. Somebody else wants to give it a try? Is something that you do considered an authentication category that we can consider here?
No.
What's that?
Depends if putting a password or pressing on a MFA token in the phone is called something you do, is considered as something you do, because you're proactively doing something.
Let me ask you this. If I ask you to type your first name and last name, type it, okay? And I ask you to do something for me, or to choose the traffic light in the picture that includes, some of them include traffic. So this is something I want you to do, okay? And something you do that can indicate that this is you, because the pace that you type your name, anybody can type your name, right? But the pace and the way you press those keys on your keyboard can be analyzed on my end as something you are, okay? That's a behavioral authentication factor. Aaron, are you with us on this?
Yes.
Okay, so also a signature, hand geometry, okay? Hand geometry are the lines of your hand. This is a set authentication, right? But the way you sign your name, it's not the signature itself, but also but mostly the way you move the pen and you move your hand as you sign your name, that's a behavior. This is something you do. And this is considered under something you are, okay? Something you are is not always your thumbprint or your eye scan or your DNA. It can be also something you do, okay? So pay attention to this in your questions, in your answers, that something you do is category 3, is type 3 authentication, all right? Are we cool? All right.
Yep.
Now, talking a bit more about the authentication, about the first A in the IAAA, we have the biometric authentication. Biometric authentication means that, I authenticate the subject, or the system authenticates the subjects on something they are physically, so part of their body. Okay, biometric authentication means that I analyze a part of your body, okay, can be blood type or DNA or thumbprint or hand geometry or whatever, that is part of who you are, okay? It's not your behavior, it's part of who you are. And a big thing that we constantly see and we're being asked on in the CISSP is the eye geometry, biometric analysis. And why is that? It's because the eye can be a good mechanism, a good authentication part of your body, because it tells us a lot. It narrows the possibility of authenticating the wrong identity, right? But there are possibilities of others claiming your identity and passing the authentication process of the eye scan. And how is that? How do they do that? Well, it all depends on the system that we have in place. If the biometric authentication system is well invested and has a very low CER, okay, the crossover error rate, very low CER, okay, that means that that system is reliable. It's super sensitive, and the percentage of mistakes are very, very low. That means that no false acceptance can take place, or very, very low percentage of false acceptance can take place, and very low percentage of false rejection. Okay, so the FAR, false acceptance, means that people that were not required to pass the authentication actually passed it. Okay, because it scanned their eye, and it's not the right thing to do, right? Because we didn't invest that much in that system. So we have a very cheap system, and that system lets everybody pass. It scans their eye, but it says, okay, you're Shachal, you're Valentino, you're Jeda, okay, you go. It's not a well-established system, and we don't want to do that. So the FAR should be low, and the FRR, false rejection, we don't want to leave the right people outside the organization. We don't want to say to our CEO, this is not you, okay? Because this is going to draw a lot of fire, a lot of bad attention to security. So we want to balance this, between the FAR and FRR, and work with the vendors on analyzing those two variables, FRR and FAR, and the crossover error rate between the two, okay? So when you ask a vendor about the CER, you're really asking them about the reliability of the authentication system, okay? Now, in your CISSP, and we will get back to this on domain 5 as well, okay? But in your CISSP, when we talk about the FAR and FRR, or biometric categories at this section, the FRR is your type 1 category for biometric efficiency or reliability. The FAR is the type 2, okay? So type 1 here is the other order from the ABC. The R comes before the A, okay? So the FRR is type 1, and FAR is type 2 category for analyzing biometric authentication mechanism. Is this clear? Is this area clear? Okay, I want you to write it down in front of you and get back to this later on. FRR is type 1 category for biometric authentication, and FAR is type 2, okay? So remember this as you take the exam, and as you practice more and more toward the exam. Now, the second A in our IAAA module is your authorization. Okay, the first one was identity, and everybody can claim an identity. The second one was authentication, and we just saw the number of authentication mechanisms that we can go through. But once the subject was authenticated, the identity was authenticated, the subject went in the system, now they're all free to go, right? They're free to work anywhere they want. The thing is that with this module, IAAA, we're saying, no, you're not free to go anywhere you want, because we want to make sure that you get the right access and the right data in front of you to do your job, okay? Always that question around authorization. What is it that I need to know and touch in order to do my job? And for this, we asked two questions. Okay, the first one is related to principle number 1, which is need to know. The question we asked there is, what do I need to know? What data do I need to be exposed to, or what information do I need to be updated with in order for me to do my job? We will see this later on in domain 2 when we talk about asset security and data classification, and when we need to make sure that the right classification level is exposed to the information that they need to know in order for them to do their job, and nothing more and nothing less. Okay? The second principle is least privilege. Least privilege says, what do I need to access? What do I need to touch in order for me to do my job? Okay, that's another question we want to have in place. Why do I need to access to do my job? Those two together make sure that our subject is right where we want them to be. Not more and not less. However, it takes a lot of analysis and a lot of work on our side as security professionals to define all this, okay? to define the principle of list privileges, right? Because we need to ask the question on each and every subject that we have, okay? We need to ask this question about each and every object that we have, classification, and so on and so forth. So it's not gonna end there. So today, these days, we have automated systems that can help us do that. For example, Varonis can do that, and even Microsoft can do that for defining the criteria for the different datas and the different subjects. So it's always important to automate these processes, but don't rely on just technology to do your job. You need to have a process and a procedure for data classification and system classification. You need to have the people understanding what they're doing, what they're required to do their job, and not more than this, okay? So think about it this way. Someone comes into your office and they pass the security guard at the entrance and they get their badge and they walk into the office, and then they came in for one meeting in a meeting room, but they accidentally opened the door to the CEO's office and they walk in. They walk right into the CEO's office. Now the CEO is not there. Do we have a problem with it as security professionals? Do you see a problem there? Valentino, do we see a problem there? Why do we see a problem there?
Well, it's unauthorized access.
They got unauthorized access, right? But with the unauthorized access, maybe we don't have a problem. What do we have problem with?
You can see whatever's in the office.
He can
Right.
access the authorized files of
Exactly.
the CEO.
So they got the access to that area of information. Now, they got unauthorized access to the area of information. They got unauthorized access to database, to a web page that they're not supposed to see. They got access to a printed paper-based information that they're not supposed to see, okay? If they do something with it, we don't know. So we want to prevent them from accessing that area to begin with, okay? That's the principle of, list privileges. From the beginning, we don't want them to be able to open the door to the CEO's office unless their badge allows them to. But this requires us to go one by one on every door and define it the way we do. Because today's CEO's office, we can go and renovate the office, and the CEO's office now becomes the main meeting room, right? Meeting area. Now we need to reprogram our badges, our access control, physical access control system to say that this is not the CEO's office anymore. This is a public area. This is the meeting room, okay? So this is something we constantly need to invest in. And for that matter, we will probably prefer to work with automated technologies to do it for us, more efficiently. Because going back to the 5 principles of the CISSP, we want to save time. We want to minimize loss, maximize profits. Okay, does that make sense? All right, good guys. All right. Another principle that we have in our authorization mechanism, the first 2 are very basic, and we want to keep them in mind constantly throughout the exam. Need to know that leads to, the need to know leads to list privileges. Okay, the data that I'm exposed to, information that I'm exposed to leads to what systems and what areas am I allowed to touch. Okay, these are the main 2. Now everything else comes after them, but it's not less important than them, but it's a derivative of those principles. So the first one is separation of duties. Separation of duties is really important to prevent fraud, okay? And everything else that we will see from here and on the authorization controls will help us prevent fraud. Now let me ask you a question. How will a separation of duties Okay, when we have more than one person closing the loop on a business process, no one person can close the loop of a business process. How does that help us prevent fraud? What do you think? How does the SOD, separation of duties, can help us prevent fraud? Carlo, do you want to give it a try?
So if we have just one person, this doesn't help us.
So one person, for example, they can issue a purchase order, right, to buy a new laptop. And then they reach out to the provider, to this computer shop, and say, I want the latest computer. They give them a price proposal, and that guy actually signs the proposal and approves the transaction to that store. What kind of supervision mechanism do we have on that guy? Basically nothing, right? Nothing. They issue the proposal, they get the proposal, they approve it, they issue the transaction. What do we see at the end of the month or the end of the year? A simple transaction, a simple line.
But
Now,
separation of duties is relevant only if you have a chain of approval or some kind of a correct process.
right, this is part of the correct process. You want to have separation of duties to have the right approval mechanism. Okay, so this is another control, separation of duties. We want to put this in place for the authorization process. Okay, once the identity was authorized and is now able to operate within the organization, we want to keep the principle of separation of duties. Means that identity cannot close the loop, the full loop, on a business process. Okay, so this will be the right process to have in place. Now, another mechanism, another principle is rotation of duties, okay? Rotation of duties is by far one of the most efficient fraud detection and deterrence controls. Okay, so deterrent control is to make sure people are seeing it and knowing about it and avoid from committing their fraud. Okay, so we deter them. We try to make them not commit that fraud. However, not all people will be obedient, and we will need to make sure that if they actually do that, if they actually commit fraud, we will be able to detect. And that's where the rotation of duties kicks in. We want to have more than one person being able to conduct the operation of that role. Very sensitive role. Let's say a role that deals or approves salaries within the organization. So we want to make sure that this role can be conducted by more than one person, more than one person inside the organization. The reason behind it is that in any given time, I can take two people and ask one of them to replace the other. Now, this guy that replaced the fraudster, the one that actually commits fraud, this guy knows how the process needs to work. And any anomaly that comes in, any anomaly that takes place during this guy's work on that role will immediately be detected by him, hopefully. He will raise the flag, alert the supervisor, the manager, saying, this happened, somebody just paid me $100 to push their CV up in the list, and that shouldn't, the process shouldn't include the pay of $100 to me as an HR representative. Does that make sense? Okay, so one person can overlook on the other's role, and by doing that, we have that authorization mechanism that is there to detect fraud. Okay, another benefit that we can get from rotation of duties is the availability. So the fact that two people can now cover for that one position, it doesn't make them redundant, but it doesn't make them less important for the organization now that they can both do the same work. But it does help redundancy. It does help availability. Okay, so this is another control that can benefit the of the availability that we mentioned before. Yes, Valentino, you have a question.
Well, it's not really a question. It's more of something that I've experienced in
Sure.
one of my previous roles.
Mhm.
So, working at the government back in 2010, there was a thing in finance where someone would actually create false employees and pay himself the salary.
Wow.
So
Okay.
so essentially, over a span of a year, this person got 20 or 25 extra people's salary paid out to him. So
Wow.
when they replaced the role, they actually saw this, and the police got involved, and everybody got locked up. So yeah, and it's quite a good example of replacing
Yeah.
an actual role.
Yeah, and think about it this way: if this guy would go through rotation of duties, if management would say, okay, this is time for rotation of duties, we're taking all sensitive roles, you know, another person will come in and see this process and will see the wrong things that are taking place in that process and will immediately alert the organization. Probably minimize a lot of losses that they experienced, but maybe unfortunately they didn't have that in place. So, something to consider. Where you have money, you have the motivation for fraud. So you want to put controls in place for that area. And now, looking at the last A in our IAAA module, the last A is now called auditing. That means that, the identification process took place and anybody claimed any identity. Now, authentication process took place and verified this identity and said, yes, I know you, I'm familiar with you, you can go in and work. Now, but you can work under this authorization processes or boundaries, for that matter. This is the data that you're able to see, and these are the systems that you can touch. Okay? Now comes in the auditing, which says, I don't trust the whole process enough to let go. I want to make sure that everything that I intended to take place actually took place. And this comes with logs and logs analysis. So whenever we audit a process, we say, these are the logs, okay? And we send them to a SIM system. And we'll get to that in domain 6 as well. We send those logs to the SIM system, and over there we have rules to analyze those logs and to make sure that the right things are actually done. Okay? Again, this is all part of the governance. And when we audit things right, no one, if we do it right, if we have the right controls in place, no one can deny the event that took place. If we do it right, if we analyze right the IAAA and we get the last day, the auditing in place the right way, we can have the non-repudiation control in place for subjects that meet objects and operate on them. Okay? And from all this together, the IAAA, we now can gain the main objective of the IAAA, which is accountability. And accountability means that we now can hold people accountable, subjects accountable for what they did and what they didn't do. Okay? Someone says, no, my identity was stolen. Okay, if your identity was stolen, how come the eye scan actually went through? Because this person, if you say that your identity was stolen, this person went through the identification process, authentication process, both password and smart card and your eye scan, okay, narrows down the possibilities. And also they knew how to operate within the authorization part, okay, on those areas that you need to know and those data that you need to know and those systems that you can touch and are privileged to work on, okay? And after doing all this and the logs that we analyzed, listen, dude, this is most likely you doing that, okay? Because again, we narrowed down the possibilities of an error. So choosing the right system to do the biometric authentication is narrowing down the possibilities for an error. And this is what we're targeting, okay? So as you think of the whole IAAA process, you think about that part when you say, I know that you did it. And I know that you did it because I have the right mechanism in place for all IAAA. Does that make sense, guys? All right, we all good there? Ready to go? All right, good. The principle that we have for governance is something that we mentioned before called defense in depth or layered security. And this principle says that we cannot guarantee security unless we base it on more than one control. More than one control and more than one category. So, much like the multi-factor authentication, I cannot rely on just the firewall keeping the bad guys out of the organization. The firewall inside the organization, everything is open. Same thing happens here. I want to make sure, if the firewall failed for some reason, I want to make sure that I have mechanisms inside my organization to monitor the activity of the users. Because it's not necessarily that everybody's doing the right thing. We just want to make sure. Okay, we don't suspect anybody, but we do want to detect. Okay, so defense in depth and layered security are both basically the same in the CISSP. And the principle behind it is that we are not relying on just one type of control to do the job for us. And also, when we categorize controls, we talk about abstraction. Abstraction means that we put controls in groups, okay, in groups or in classes, and we put users, subjects in classes. So abstraction of subjects means that those subjects are put in groups, and therefore we can control what they can and cannot do easily, more efficiently, okay? Again, we're thinking like business person, okay? We want to do things efficiently. Another principle of security is data hiding. Data hiding means that we do not put the whole data, the whole information out there simply because those individuals that are exposed to this data are not supposed to be exposed to everything because it's not what they need to do their job. So here in data hiding, okay, and we will get to that in cryptography in domain 3, and we will talk about that in domain 5 in the identity and access management, and in domain 8 when we talk about database security and data security. But here for this matter, we're talking about preventing data from being discovered or accessed by subjects that are not supposed to. So for subject number 1, I can show this piece of data. Subject number 2, this piece of data by the administrator is probably going to be able to see the full picture here, okay? So 1 or 2 or maybe just a small number of subjects can be exposed to the whole the whole package of data, but not everyone, okay? Simply because I want to maintain those principles of need to know and least privileges again, right? Domain 3, in a couple of days, we will get to domain 3, and we'll talk a lot about data encryption, but for this matter, for this part here for the governance, the encryption is an important element of security controls, especially in regard to transmission between systems, data between systems. So for this matter, and we'll talk about this when we get to domain 4, domain 3, we'll talk about the systems that are connected, okay? So some kind of a channel, between two systems that can be encrypted. So that channel now is protected from anyone penetrating from the outside, but we do not just rely on this one. So what we do is that we encrypt the channel, but we also encrypt the ball of information that moves inside that channel. So if the channel is broken, right, and we now have someone eavesdropping our network, okay, they still cannot manipulate the data because the data itself is now encrypted differently, right? Maybe this one is asymmetric encryption and this one is symmetric encryption or vice versa. Okay, there are many ways to encrypt the data and the channel itself, okay? And we will talk about this more on domain 3, but data encryption keeps the data confidential. Wherever you have the word confidentiality, I want you to think also privacy, okay? So confidentiality helps us maintain privacy as well, all right? So questions that you get on privacy can benefit from confidentiality controls, all right? We'll get to that later on today. Another topic here, security management plans. So this is purely governance, the way we do things and the right way we do things. And after the next slide, we'll have an example and we'll take a break then. I see that you're getting a little bit agitated there in your seats. So I'm respecting your body movements, even though you're not saying anything. I told you to raise your hand and say, we need a break, okay? So let's cover this area and then we can come back to it later on. So security management plans are divided into three: long-term, mid-term, and short-term plans. Long-term plans are strategy. Okay, strategy means that we now have goals and missions and objectives. And if I take you back to the beginning of today, of this bootcamp, the objective of everything that we do in this bootcamp is, what is the objective of what we do here?
To pass the CISSP exam.
To pass the CISSP exam, right? We simply want to pass the CISSP exam. We always have that in our strategy state of mind. How do we do that? How do we accomplish this?
By
We
learning.
meet 5-6 times before our bootcamp. We have the books in place. We start reading, we start taking exams, and we take the bootcamp. So this package of what we do, the plan or details on how to accomplish that objective is right here, right now, right? But this is a plan. The plan includes the day-to-day operations, okay? So strategy is built on tactics, and tactics will be translated into the day-to-day operations. Today, we started with domain 1. Later on, tomorrow, we're going to touch domain 2 and 3 and so on and so forth. And on Friday, by noon, we're going to finish the material of domain 8, and we're going to do a review in the second part of the day, review of the entire bootcamp. Okay, that's how you achieve the tactics, and the tactics will lead us to gaining the objective, okay, achieving the objective. Is this all clear until now, guys?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Any questions
Yeah.
so far?
No.
Yes.
For me.
Yes, questions? Good. Go ahead.
Just something related to the material. I'm trying to write, like listen and write and look at the book. What do you recommend? To continue writing because you're moving
Continue
fast.
writing. In your booklets, in the materials that you got, the printouts, continue writing. Wherever there's something super significant, I'm reiterating the message. Okay, I repeat the message time and time again, and I repeat the message when we encounter something that will sound familiar later on in the bootcamp. So always write. Okay.
Okay.
And keep asking questions, and bear in mind again, those sessions are recorded for you to go back to. Okay, so those sessions can be easily tracked when you write on your booklets. Okay, because you write on the presentation and you can mark this one with a huge question mark and then go back to that session and find exactly this slide and listen to it again. All right?
Okay.
All right, guys, let's take 15 minutes break. We'll be back at 12 your time for another 1 hour session, and then we'll take the lunch break that everybody's waiting for. Take a coffee break, and I'll see you in 15.
Okay. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
You know.
All right.